Go ahead, sign it. This is the moment you finally realize you lost.
Please don't do this.
The mahogany doors of Courtroom 4B swung open with a heavy, final thud. Mark didn't just walk out, he strutted. He adjusted his silk tie, the silver wedding band he'd already moved to his right hand catching the fluorescent light. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery, not a man who had just ended a 7-year marriage. "Standard settlement, Elena," Mark said, spinning around to face her. He didn't stop walking backward, a predatory grin stretching his face. "No alimony, no share of the tech shares. Just your personal belongings and that modest little condo I graciously let you keep. I told you don't bring a butter knife to a gunfight." Hello, story lover friends. Subscribe our channel for more interesting stories. Elena stood perfectly still. The draft from the hallway ruffled her dark hair, but she didn't blink. She looked at him, really looked at him, seeing the stranger who had replaced the man she once loved. "You seem very satisfied with yourself, Mark," she said quietly. Her voice lacked the tremor he clearly expected. "Satisfied? I'm ecstatic. My lawyers are the best in the city. They found loopholes your little boutique firm couldn't even spell." He stepped closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "You were always too soft for this world, Al. Too quiet. In this life, the loudest person wins. And right now I'm screaming." He laughed, a sharp, jagged sound that drew looks from the passing bailiffs. He pulled his phone from his pocket, likely to call his mistress. The consultant he'd been seeing since the ink on their mortgage was barely dry. "Oh, by the way," Mark added, pausing at the elevators. "The judge mentioned the lead arbitrator was an old-school guy. Strict. He really took a liking to my financial transparency argument. You should have tried harder to look like the victim. You just looked empty." "I wasn't playing a part, Mark," Elena replied. "Clearly." He pressed the down button aggressively. "Anyway, have a nice life. Or whatever version of one you can afford now." Elena watched the elevator doors slide shut on his smug, triumphant face. She didn't move until the light above the door shifted to G. Her phone vibrated in her hand. It wasn't a text from her lawyer. It was a private, encrypted message. "The theater is closed. Did he take the bait?" Elena looked down the long, empty hallway toward the judge's private chambers. Behind those doors sat the man who had orchestrated every loophole Marcus' lawyers had miraculously stumbled upon. The man who had ensured the arbitrator was strict. She began to type a response, her fingers steady. "He thinks he took everything. He's celebrating." She paused. In the distance, the heavy scent of her father's expensive tobacco seemed to drift through the vents, a signature he left only when he wanted her to know he was watching. A shadow fell over her phone screen. Elena looked up to see the court clerk standing there, holding a single blue folder that hadn't been presented in court. "Mrs. Sterling? Your father said you'd need the actual schedule of assets. The one your husband just signed away without reading." Elena reached for the folder, her heart hammering. "And the signature on page 12? "Authenticated," the clerk whispered, glancing around nervously. "But there's a problem. Your husband didn't just sign the divorce papers. He signed." The fire alarm suddenly shrieked, drowning out the clerk's voice as the overhead sprinklers began to hiss. The cold mist of the sprinklers coated Elena's skin, turning her silk blouse into a second skin. Panic erupted around her as lawyers and clerks scrambled toward the stairwells, their shouts echoing against the marble floors. The clerk who had been holding the blue folder was swept away in the tide of frantic bodies, but Elena's grip on the document remained ironclad. She ducked into a recessed alcove, shielding the folder with her body, her eyes blurred as she flipped to page 12. There, beneath the official court seal, was Mark's jagged, arrogant signature. He thought he had signed an indemnity waiver for the tech shares. Instead, he had unknowingly signed a power of attorney transfer, effective immediately upon the finalization of the divorce. Her phone buzzed again, a voice call. "Step out of the building, Elena. The alarm was a necessary distraction." The voice was deep, resonant, and carried the weight of a man who owned the air he breathed. "Arthur Vance didn't ask," he commanded. "Father," Elena whispered, stepping into the chaotic hallway. "The clerk said there's a problem." "What did he sign that wasn't in the brief?" "Not over the phone." "Get to the black sedan at the north exit. Mark is already at the club, bragging to his associates. He thinks he's the king of the world today. Let him wear the crown for another hour. It makes the fall more cinematic." The line went dead. Elena pushed through the heavy emergency doors, the humid afternoon air hitting her like a physical blow. Standing by the curb was a sleek, obsidian-tinted vehicle. The driver, a man she'd known since childhood as her father's shadow, held the door open without a word. As the car pulled away from the curb, Elena opened the folder again. Her eyes locked onto a clause buried in the fine print of the schedule of assets. It wasn't just about the money. Mark had unknowingly signed over the intellectual property rights to the Aegis encryption, the very foundation of the company he had built on her back. He had called her soft, yet he hadn't even bothered to read the supplemental filings her father's team had swapped in at the 11th hour. He's going to realize it soon, Elena said to the rearview mirror. Mr. Vance has handled the delay, ma'am, the driver replied smoothly. Mr. Sterling's accounts have been flagged for routine audit. He won't be able to see the balance transfers until the morning. By then, the board meeting will be over. Elena looked out the window. She saw Mark's favorite steakhouse fly by. Through the glass she caught a glimpse of him raising a glass of champagne, surrounded by laughing men in expensive suits. He looked powerful. He looked invincible. She felt a flicker of the old fear, the ghost of the woman who used to apologize for the way his dinner was cooked. But then she looked at the blue folder. He called me empty, she murmured to the glass. And what do you call him, Elena? She turned. Her father was sitting in the shadows of the extra-wide rear seat, his silver-topped cane resting between his knees. He hadn't been there a second ago. I call him a tenant, Elena said, her voice hardening, and his lease just expired. Arthur Vance smiled, a slow, dangerous expression. Good. But there is one thing you didn't see in the folder. Mark didn't act alone. Your lawyer, Sarah? She wasn't just incompetent. She was. A loud crack shattered the rear window, glass sprang across the leather as the car swerved violently. The sedan fishtailed, the screech of rubber against asphalt drowning out the ringing in Elena's ears. Her father's hand, surprisingly strong for his age, clamped onto her shoulder, shoving her down toward the floorboards. Stay down, Arthur barked. The driver, unfazed, jerked the wheel, weaving through the midday traffic with surgical precision. Elena's face was pressed against the plush floor mat. The smell of expensive leather was now tinged with the metallic scent of gunpowder and the ozone of shattered glass. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not with the paralyzed terror she would have felt a month ago, but with a cold, sharpening clarity. Was that Mark? She gasped, her voice muffled. Mark doesn't have the stomach for lead, Arthur replied, his voice eerily calm as he checked his watch. He prefers to ruin lives with a pen. No, this is someone far more desperate, someone who knows what's in that folder. The car took a sharp right, the force of the turn tossing Elena against the seat base. After a few more seconds of high-speed maneuvering, the car smoothed out, settling into a steady, rhythmic pace. We're clear, the driver announced. It was a warning shot, sir. They took the exit toward the docks. Elena sat up, brushing glass shards from her ruined blouse. She looked at her father. He wasn't looking at her. He was staring at the hole in the window, his jaw set in a hard line. You were saying, Elena prompted, her voice steadier than she expected, about my lawyer, Sarah. She was what? Arthur turned his gaze to her. She was on his payroll from day one, Elena. Every strategy meeting you had, every secret you shared, went straight to Mark's desk. But it goes deeper. She wasn't just his spy. She was the one who suggested he use the Vance offshore accounts to hide his personal bonuses. She thought she was helping him rob me. Elena felt a nauseating wave of betrayal. Sarah had been her bridesmaid. She had held Elena's hand when the first divorce papers were served. Why would she do that? She knew what he was doing to me. Money is a loud motivator, Arthur said. But Sarah made a fatal mistake. She assumed I was a retired old man who had lost his grip on the city. She didn't realize that I don't just own the bank, I own the air the bank breathes. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a small digital tablet, sliding it toward her. Mark is at the club right now, celebrating his victory. He thinks Sarah is meeting him there to hand over the final decree and a celebratory bottle of scotch. He doesn't know she's currently being detained for a professional ethics review that will end her career by sunset. Elena looked at the screen. It was a live feed of the club's terrace. Mark was laughing, his arm draped around a blonde woman Elena recognized as his consultant. He looked so untouchable. I want to be the one to tell him, Elena said suddenly. Arthur's eyebrow arched. It's dangerous, Elena. The shot at the car proves they're playing for keeps now. He called me a butter knife, father, Elena said, her fingers tightening around the blue folder. I want him to see the edge. Then you'll need to change, Arthur said, gesturing to a garment bag in the front seat. We have a board meeting to crash. But first, there's a phone call you need to take. It's the bank. They found a discrepancy in Mark's personal account, something he didn't even tell Sarah about. Elena took the phone. Hello, Mrs. Sterling? A voice whispered. I'm the head of compliance. We found the Blackwood transfer. If you authorize the freeze now, your husband will be penniless in 3 minutes. But there's a catch. If you freeze it, he'll know. A sudden, violent explosion shook the street behind them, the sound of a car bomb erupting blocks away. The shockwave from the blast rattled the sedan's frame, but Elena didn't flinch. She stared at the black screen of the phone, the compliance officer's voice still echoing in her ear. The Blackwood transfer. She knew that name. It wasn't just an account, it was the name of the summer estate Mark had promised her for their 5th anniversary. The one he later claimed he couldn't afford because of market volatility. Freeze it, Elena said, her voice dropping an octave. Not in 3 minutes. Do it now. Elena, her father cautioned, his eyes narrowed as he watched the smoke rise in the rearview mirror. If you move too early, you lose the element of surprise. Let him buy the next round of drinks. Let the bill hit the table. He's already spent my life, father, Elena replied, turning to look him in the eye. I'm not interested in his surprise. I'm interested in his panic. The car pulled into the underground garage of the Sterling Heights building. The driver stepped out, moving with a fluid, lethal grace to open Elena's door. She emerged from the vehicle transformed. Gone was the rumpled, tear-stained woman from the morning's hearing. She wore a sharp, charcoal gray power suit her father had kept waiting in the car, a suit that screamed authority. The board is waiting in the penthouse, Arthur said, leaning heavily on his cane as he joined her. They think they here to ratify Mark as the sole CEO following the successful asset restructuring of his divorce. They have no idea the restructuring was actually a hostile takeover. And Mark? Elena asked. He's on his way from the club. He thinks he's coming to his coronation. They entered the private elevator. As the floors ticked upward, the silence between them was heavy. Elena watched her reflection in the polished brass doors. She looked like her father, cold, calculated, and entirely focused. You're wondering if I'm as cruel as he is, Arthur said softly, not looking at her. I'm wondering if you ever intended for this marriage to work, Elena countered. Arthur's silence was its own answer. I provide the tools, Elena. How you use them is your legacy. Cruelty is loud. Self-respect is quiet. Remember that when you face him. The elevator chimed, and the doors slid open to a panoramic view of the city. The boardroom was filled with men in dark suits, their murmurs dying away as Elena walked in. At the head of the table sat an empty leather chair, Mark's chair. Elena didn't sit. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the street where Mark's silver convertible was just pulling into the valet. She could see him even from 50 stories up, the way he threw his keys to the attendant, the way he adjusted his jacket with that insufferable smirk. Her phone vibrated, a text from an unknown number. The Blackwood funds didn't just disappear, Elena. Look at the beneficiary list on page 15. It wasn't just Sarah. Elena flipped the pages of the blue folder with trembling hands. Her eyes scanned the list of names. She stopped at the third one, the air leaving her lungs in a sharp hiss. The heavy double doors of the boardroom burst open. Mark walked in, arms spread wide, a boisterous laugh already on his lips. Gentlemen? And Elena? What the hell are you doing in my chair? He stopped, his eyes darting from Elena to Arthur, then to the silent board members. His phone pinged, a notification from his bank. His smirk flickered. Mark, Elena said, her voice like ice. We were just discussing your financial transparency. Why don't you tell the board about your mother's secret medical trust? Mark's face went bone white. How did you? I didn't, Elena said, stepping toward him. You signed the disclosure yourself. Right between the I do and the I'm leaving. Mark's hand froze over his phone. The silence in the boardroom was absolute, the kind of silence that precedes a landslide. He looked at the faces of the board members, men he had golfed with, men he had lied to, and saw only cold, clinical observation. They weren't his friends. They were predators waiting for a son of blood. My mother's trust is private, Elena, Mark hissed, finally regaining his voice. He stepped toward the table, trying to reclaim his space, but the weight of the room had shifted. It has nothing to do with Sterling Heights or this divorce. If you've been digging into my family's medical history, you're more desperate than I thought. It has everything to do with this company when you funded it using redirected R&D grants, Elena replied. She didn't move. She stood her ground, the blue folder resting on the mahogany table like a guillotine blade. You didn't just hide money from me, Mark. You embezzled from your own shareholders to pay for a private clinic in Switzerland. A clinic that, according to these records, doesn't actually exist. Mark laughed, though the sound was thin and brittle. This is a joke. A pathetic, jilted wife fantasy. Arthur, tell her to stop. You're a businessman. You know, this is just noise. Arthur Vance didn't look up from his hands, which were folded neatly over the head of his cane. The noise you're hearing, Mark, is the sound of your own foundations cracking. I'd listen closely if I were you. Mark's phone began to vibrate incessantly on the table. One notification, then 5, then 10. He snatched it up, his thumb scrolling frantically. His face transitioned from pale to a sickly mottled gray. Declined? How can the corporate card be declined? I have a bridge loan closing in 20 minutes. The bridge loan was secured against the Aegis encryption rights, Elena said, her voice calm and melodic, a sharp contrast to his rising panic. Rights that you transferred to a holding company this morning, a holding company owned by my father's estate. You don't own the tech, Mark. You don't own this office. You don't even own the suit you're wearing. It was purchased with a company account that was frozen 60 seconds ago. Mark lunged for the table, his composure finally shattering. You set me up. You and that old ghost planned this. No, Elena said, her eyes flashing with a fire he had never seen during their years of marriage. I just stopped being the person you thought I was. I stopped apologizing for your mistakes. I started reading the fine print. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the room. Cruelty is loud, Mark, but self-respect? Self-respect is quiet. And it's very, very expensive. Mark opened his mouth to retort, a vein pulsing in his forehead, when the boardroom's double doors opened again. This time it wasn't a dramatic entrance. It was two men in dark suits, carrying briefcases, followed by a woman in a police uniform. Mark Sterling? The woman asked. We have a warrant for a search of your private residence and a subpoena for your digital records regarding the Blackwood transfers. Mark looked at Elena, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and genuine shock. You called the feds? Over a divorce? It ceased being a divorce the moment you started a war, Elena said. As the officers moved toward him, Mark's phone rang one last time. He looked at the screen. It was Sarah, his lawyer. He answered it, desperate for a lifeline. Sarah, thank God, where are you? The voice on the other end wasn't Sarah's. It was a man, low and gravelly. Mr. Sterling? Sarah is currently unavailable. But she left something behind for you. A recording. You might want to hear it before they take your phone. The line cut off, replaced by a grainy audio file that began to play automatically over the boardroom's speaker system. The audio file hissed through the high-end boardroom speakers, a hollow, echoing sound that filled the vacuum of Mark's silence. Then, a voice emerged, Sarah's voice. Sharp and devoid of the professional warmth she usually reserved for Elena. He's pathetic, Mark, Sarah's recorded voice said. He thinks the Vance name is a shield, but he's just a dinosaur. Once we drain the Blackwood accounts and trigger the Aegis transfer, Elena will be left with nothing but a beautiful name and a pile of legal fees. You're sure the offshore routing is secure? Then came Mark's voice, clear as a bell, distorted only by his own arrogance. The girl doesn't even know how to check a bank statement. Sarah, she's spent 7 years looking for my approval. She's not going to start looking for my footprints. By the time she realizes the company is a hollow shell, I'll be in Singapore with the IP. Let her keep the condo. It'll give her somewhere to cry. The recording cut off with a brutal click. The board members looked away, some shifting uncomfortably, others staring at Mark with naked contempt. Mark himself looked as though he had been struck. He reached out to steady himself against the back of a chair, his chair, but his hand slipped. That's inadmissible, Mark stammered, his eyes darting to the police officer. That's a private conversation. It's been tampered with. Elena, tell them. I didn't record that, Mark, Elena said, her voice surprisingly soft. She felt a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching a film of her own life. Sarah did. She was recording every call you had. I suppose she wanted her own insurance policy in case you decided to discard her the way you discarded me. The officer stepped forward, her hand resting on the handcuffs at her belt. Mr. Sterling, we need you to come with us. Now. Wait! Mark shouted, his face reddening. He turned to Arthur. Arthur, please, I'm your son-in-law. Think about the scandal. The Vance name will be dragged through the mud. We can settle this. I'll give it all back. Just stop this. Arthur Vance stood up slowly, his cane clicking against the floor. He walked over to Mark, stopping just inches from his face. He was shorter than Mark, but in that moment, he seemed to tower over him. You made two mistakes, Mark, Arthur said quietly. First, you thought my daughter was a trophy to be kept on a shelf. Second, you thought I was a man who valued reputation over family. He leaned in closer. I didn't build this empire to protect my name. I built it to protect my blood. And you? You're just a parasite I finally decided to salt. Arthur turned to the board. The meeting is adjourned. My daughter will be acting as interim CEO, effective immediately. Any objections? The silence was a unanimous no. As the officers led a protesting, disheveled Mark toward the door, he stopped and looked back at Elena. You think you've won? You're just like him now, cold, alone, you'll see. Elena, you'll see what it is like when there is no one left to love you. Elena didn't answer. She watched him go, the heavy doors closing on his voice. She expected to feel a rush of triumph, a surge of adrenaline. Instead, she felt a profound sense of space. Her father asked, his hand hovering near her arm, Are you all right? She looked at the empty boardroom, then at the blue folder. There was a third name on the beneficiary list, Father, on page 15. You told me to look. Arthur's expression shifted, a flicker of something like regret crossing his features. I did. It wasn't just Sarah and Mark, Elena said, her heart beginning to race. The third name is a holding company registered to a law firm in London. Your law firm. Before Arthur could speak, the elevator chime rang out again. The doors opened to reveal a man in a tailored suit Elena had never seen before, carrying a silver briefcase. Mrs. Sterling? The man asked. I have the final piece of the Blackwood puzzle. Your husband didn't just steal the money. He was being blackmailed. The man with the silver briefcase stepped into the room, his presence casting a long clinical shadow over the plush carpet. Elena felt the air in the boardroom grow heavy, the oxygen seemingly replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. She looked from the newcomer to her father, whose grip on his silver cane had tightened until his knuckles were white. Elena? Blackmailed? Elena repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. By whom? Mark didn't have enough substance to be worth blackmailing. He had your father's trust, Mrs. Sterling, the man replied, clicking the latches on the briefcase. And in this city, that is the highest form of currency. My name is Julian Vane. I represent the London firm you found on page 15. Your husband was siphoning funds not just for greed, but to bury a series of documents that would have dismantled the Vance legacy decades ago. Elena turned to Arthur. Her father wouldn't meet her eyes. He was staring out the window at the sprawling city he had spent 50 years conquering. Father? She prompted, her voice barely a whisper. What is he talking about? Every empire has a foundation of bones, Elena, Arthur said, his voice sounding older. More brittle than it had in the car. Mark discovered a truth about how I secured the initial capital for Sterling Heights. He thought he could use it to keep me in check while he bled the company dry. He didn't realize that I would rather burn the house down with both of us inside than let him hold a leash over my daughter. Julian pulled a single, yellowed sheet of paper from the briefcase and slid it across the mahogany table toward Elena. Mark wasn't just working with Sarah. He was being squeezed by a third party, someone who knew about the 1994 merger irregularities. He was trying to buy their silence using your inheritance. Elena looked at the paper. It wasn't a bank statement. It was a confession signed by a man who had disappeared 20 years ago. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. The victory she had just achieved felt suddenly hollow, a carefully constructed stage play where she was the only actor who didn't know the script. So the shootout at the car, Elena said, her mind racing. The explosion, that wasn't Mark's people. No, Julian said. That was the third party. They realized that once you took control of the Aegis encryption, their leverage over your father would vanish. They weren't trying to kill you, Elena. They were trying to stop the transfer. A sudden, sharp vibration echoed through the room. Not a phone, but a low-frequency hum that made the glass windows rattle. "They're not done," Arthur said, finally looking at her. His eyes were filled with a desperate paternal fear. "Elena, you have to sign the final Aegis release now. If the IP stays in your name, you are the target. If you release it to the public domain, the secret dies with the profit." "Public domain?" Elena gasped. "That's billions of dollars, father. That's my future." "It's your freedom," Arthur countered. The boardroom doors groaned as the electronic locks suddenly cycled. A red light began to flash over the exit. "They've bypassed the building security," Julian said, his voice losing its professional calm. "We have maybe 2 minutes before the elevators are overridden." Elena looked at the blue folder, then at her father, then at the pen on the table. The strength she had built over the last few hours was being tested by a new kind of fire. She wasn't just fighting a husband anymore, she was fighting a legacy. "I choose me," she whispered, grabbing the pen. The red light of the security system bathed the room in a rhythmic, bloody pulse. Elena didn't look at the doors. She didn't look at Julian or the panic etched into his face. She looked at the signature line on the final page of the Aegis release. Her hand didn't shake. The woman who had spent 7 years apologizing for her own existence was gone, replaced by someone forged in the wreckage of a shattered marriage and a father's sins. "The public domain is a death sentence for the company, Elena," Arthur warned, his voice straining against the mechanical hum of the building's override. "Think about what you're throwing away." "I'm not throwing anything away, father," Elena said, her voice steady and clear. "I'm buying my silence, and yours." With a swift, fluid motion, she didn't sign the public release. Instead, she scrawled her name across a different document hidden in the back of the folder. A clause she had drafted in secret with her own hidden counsel weeks ago. She hit the send button on her tablet, authorizing a global encryption burst. The humming stopped instantly. The red lights flickered and died, replaced by the cool, steady glow of the emergency power. "What did you do?" Julian asked, staring at his dead briefcase screen. "I didn't release it to the public," Elena said, standing up and smoothing her jacket. "I updated the Aegis protocol. The key is now decentralized. No one person holds the leverage anymore, not Mark, not you, and not even my father. The secrets you were all so afraid of are now encrypted behind a wall that would take 1,000 years to crack. The leverage is gone because the prize is gone." She turned to her father. Arthur looked at her with a mixture of shock and a dawning reluctant pride. He realized in that moment that he hadn't just saved his daughter, he had created an equal. "The third party has nothing to hold over us now," Elena continued. "And Mark? Mark has nothing at all. He won the divorce with a smile. But he didn't realize that while he was playing for the house, I was playing for the foundation." The boardroom doors finally hummed open. This time, it wasn't a threat that entered, but a clean, cooling breeze from the hallway. Elena picked up the blue folder. She walked past Julian and past her father, heading toward the private elevator. "Where are you going?" Arthur called out. Elena paused at the threshold, her silhouette framed by the panoramic view of the city she now truly understood. "I'm going to go have that celebratory bottle of Scotch Mark bought. Alone. Because for the first time in my life, I don't need anyone's approval to enjoy the taste." She stepped into the elevator. As the doors began to close, she caught a glimpse of her reflection. She wasn't a victim, and she wasn't just a Vance. She was Elena. "Cruelty is loud," she whispered to the closing doors. "But I've always preferred the quiet." The elevator descended, leaving the ghosts of the past 50 floors above. Outside, the city was waking up to a new day. And for Elena, the air had never felt thinner or easier to breathe. She had lost a husband and gained a kingdom, but most importantly, she had finally chosen herself. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe our channel for more powerful and thrilling stories.